You could blame it on the pyramids, the Great Wall of China, anesthesia, airplanes, space shuttles, in vitro fertilization, roller coasters, organ transplants, the way meteorologists can predict the hour snow will begin to fall, the fact that surgery can be successfully performed on a fetus, self-driving cars. You could blame it on the way I watched AIDS evolve from plague, certain death, panic, exclusion, to manageable disease with normal life expectancy. This is all the fault of the people who landed on the moon. Animals being brought back from the brink of extinction. It is the immediate access to information, online dating, virtual reality, metaverse, cryptocurrency. I place the onus on scientists and explorers, historians and anthropologists. I hold mathematicians, engineers, teachers, artists, and architects wholly responsible for my faith in possibility. We are capable of anything. Time travel wouldn't surprise me. I cannot wait until we get this human thing a little more under control. I look forward to the progress and playing a part in the process and the victory we can proclaim in what I can only assume will be the very near future. Imagine with me. What if Black women were not expected to save their own lives? What if birthing a Black baby wasn't so dangerous? What if people believed we were as in need of and deserving of the care and relief as any other body? What if we are not categorized as sub or superhuman?
You know, we're dying. We've seen African American women dying far more in childbirth than probably ever before. There are a lot of different disparities in cancer outcomes and STI outcomes, HIV outcomes. Racism and the effects of racism are really what's leading to these disparities in health. And it just shows up in maternal mortality. It shows up in infant mortality. It shows up in cancer outcomes and things like that. I don't necessarily think that we, the collective, are going to end racism. But I do think that we have a role to play in our communities to say, hey, can you shift what you're doing a little bit and really think about what you're providing and how it impacts the people that you're providing it to, how you're providing it, so that we can start to undo some of that stress, that chronic stress. If I'm worried about where I'm going to live, how I'm going to eat, if I have a job, have my kids and all these other things, there's no way I'm going to have good outcomes. It's just impossible. So all these people who are providing all of these services need to consider that and consider it from the perspective of the people that they're serving, which doesn't usually happen.
Some of the work that we're doing is really attempting to look at the intersection of so many issues, right? So like, how do we build capacity in our community at the individual level, at the family level, and really advocate for equitable policies that are helpful for our communities.
We consider ourselves a movement building organization. We really focus on women and girls of color, looking at what would it look like if women and girls of color experienced optimal health and well-being.
I think the challenge for us is, one, bringing awareness to the issue, but then what do we do about it? We're both educators, we're both trainers, so a lot of what we do is not just stop at awareness or at the research, but really like, what are the interventions that we can advocate for? Like really thinking about the ways in which we can make change, we can do something to make things a little bit better, definitely for our kids, but actually today for the people in our community.
It is really important for us to have intergenerational conversations, no different than it is for us to have, multicultural conversations. I'm very aware of the issues that I might have had growing up and not wanting my daughter to experience those same things. I'm aware of what my mother and my grandmother had gone through, particularly around race, that I want to make, I don't know if it's really shield my daughter from, but really do a lot of explaining and so that there's more understanding of, where we are in the world. So I think everybody should be thinking this way. Like, we really need to be thinking like, what happened a long time ago can repeat itself. How do we prepare our children not to repeat even the mistakes that we've made or the things that we've experienced?
What if it were safe to admit living, managing lack of opportunities, managing an abundance of bigotry, violence, and injustice is much too hard, and you had been wondering if another plane of existence may offer you asylum? What if you weren't at risk for being imprisoned for saying that out loud? What if the curls and the spice and the way you pronounce your words echoed like brilliance instead of foreign in everyone's ears? What if it weren't criminal to be too sad to wake up every day? What if we paused to figure out how we could lift some burden up off you?
Unfortunately, I have experienced suicidal thoughts since I was a child. Depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts have been part of my life since then. When I came here to the US 13 years ago from the Dominican Republic, everything kind of just exploded. My experiences in the psychiatric system, the mental health system, were extremely traumatic. All decisions about my care were made on my behalf just because I said, I am suicidal. The response was violence. The response was a law enforcement showing up in my home without my consent, telling me basically that they knew better. No once was I asked, what do you need? When I talk about suicide, I say that suicide is a social justice issue. Mental health is a social justice issue. Many of the people who die by suicide don't even have a diagnosed mental health condition because it's way more than just depression or anxiety. It is the conditions around us. It's things like unemployment, things like living wage. All of these things around us is what create conditions for suicide to happen. And racism is one of them, because racism is also attached to trauma, especially when we talk about intergenerational trauma. That's a huge risk factor for suicide. Part of what I'm doing is I actually want to go to the community, not just talking to providers like therapists, social workers, and things like that, but actually going to the community and talk to the stakeholders of mental health, the cultural stakeholders of mental health. I'm talking about people in our community who are already doing suicide prevention work, but are not recognized that way. So people like hairstylists and barbers in our community are sources of emotional support that we can totally talk to, have dialogues with, so they actually can do interventions. Let's also talk to the bodega owner. The bodega owners who know the community like the back of their hand. They have knowledge about the community, about how to connect with the community that should be recognized as important. We have to understand that the Latino, Latinx, Black population, Asian cultures, we do talk about mental health. We just talk about it differently because we're not white. We might not use the terminology depression and anxiety, but we are expressing the depression, anxiety, suicidality in different ways, in our cultural ways. The barber and the hairstylist who might be older, they have wisdom about these different ways that suicidality and mental health show up in different demographics. So for instance, I interview a hairstylist. I asked this hairstylist, like, how do you know they're not doing okay? And she told me, oh, well, there are things like depression locks. And I was like, huh? What is that? And she said, well, I noticed that things might not go well by the quality of the hair. So there are people who, when I look at their locks, I notice they're not taking care of the locks. And maybe they have been taking care of them in the past, and now they're not. Why? Because maybe they are in bed for days. Maybe they don't have time to take care of it when they actually want to take care of it. And so these hairstylists, like many other hairstylists, notice that things are going wrong just by looking at the quality of the hair, looking at the patterns of cancellation for appointments. She told me things like, hey, I know someone who keeps canceling their appointments. I know something's going on. So these are people who might be in the older side that have wisdom for us, that tell us, oh, these are also signs that indicate someone might not be doing okay. But again, we don't have that wisdom unless we talk to them. So it's not so much about shifting perspectives. It's about how do people talk about mental health already? And how do we learn from that? What do we take from that? And how do we introduce it to the mainstream mental health field?
We should be able to feel the earth cry out when an Indigenous daughter does not make her way home. What kind of tech would that require? What if her brown absence inspired the same level of search party, investigation, and news coverage as Natalie Holloway? All mama's heartache could matter.
This is an issue that, again, mainstream society has missed. But we still have 7,000 Indigenous women that are murdered and missing in this country today. And there's very little mention of that in the mainstream media. And so to have Nayana's ascension really in the Indigenous world to fame with the 60 plus portraits that she's done has brought an incredible amount of healing to many families that are missing their loved ones and don't have answers. Art is a medicine. I think it's important to understand first that in most Indigenous languages, there is no word for art. Art is our daily lives. It is the nature around us. It is our emotions. It's a way of conveying something. It can be something as simple as using a turned spoon. It can be as simple as wearing wampum. It's just a creation of feelings or your identity, your culture, representing where you are, the land that you're on, where you're living.
Oftentimes, art or creation is left out of conversations regarding health. Why do you think art in daily life can be just as powerful as like other forms of medicine?
It's like decolonizing. We need to address decolonization and the act of active colonization. People think that it's a process that's in the past. It is an ongoing process. And we need to unpack and just decolonize before we can even begin the work of racial equity and social justice. Okiteo brings a place of safety. It's a safe place for us to learn about our cultures, learn about our medicines and our ceremonies. We are having that space where we're not being told that we're crazy or that your healing doesn't work. We've heard all kinds of like horrible biased stereotypes about Indigenous ceremonies and traditional medicines, but this is a safe place. This is where you hear the stories of the traditional medicines. You hear the stories of the stars. You hear the stories of creation, and all of that is medicine.
How has programs and activities at the center used creation, right, as a tool for decolonizing and healing?
We have an artist in residence who is Andre Strong Bearheart Gaines, and he has 2 workshops that are on site. One is a wood workshop where he uses the cedar that he sustainably harvests, and he creates paddles. Some of these paddles are ceremonial paddles, like for the Deer Island paddle that happens in October, or dance paddles that are taken into the dance circle of powwows, or for prayer, for ceremony. He also creates other pieces of regalia and feather boxes out of the cedar. And he also has a wampum workshop, which is where he crafts different items out of wampum, the quahog shell. We also have a visiting Native youth artist in residence, Tamantha Sylvester, and she works in the theater arts. She's an actress and a playwright. She'll be working as our youth outreach advisor. I feel like our next focus is to really focus on our youth. We would like to have a youth council get started and get more of the Native youth in the area involved and ask them what they would like to have for workshops. We did have a regalia workshop that was attended by a lot of youth. I know that they want to study dancing. They want to study telling the stories. We have a lot of potential here, and we're just scratching the surface, and we're finding ourselves as we go.
How have you seen art and creation being used to counteract that othering that's happening?
You can see yourself being mirrored. You can see yourself being seen. You can see communities like your own. You can see grandmas and aunties and children that look just like yourself. I think that that's enormous, and feeling seen is being able to look at something and recognize that as your own community, especially when we are so invisible.
Every generation brings new and valid perspective, whether we find ourselves here electively or we are a single descendant removed from slavery. All of us are seeking community.
My family, when I have conversations with them about race and racism and just Black Lives Matter issues, they don't really identify with the Black culture in America. They separate themselves from that. And I see that as a really big issue, because when we all look at each other, we're all Black.
When I come north from South Carolina, there was blacks and whites. Different places, different theater, different doors for different ones. I didn't like it because Grandpa said it wasn't right. So I decided I'd stay. And I like it here because everybody had equal rights here in Massachusetts.
My family migrated here back in 2008. When we first heard that we were moving here, we were really excited because we were always told about the American dream and just how we would have freedom and many opportunities to do what we want. When we came here, it was kind of a different experience.
I did just like my father and his father before him. They made their own job. They didn't wait for somebody to get it in the paper or call them. When I got here, I worked at different restaurants. I went and bought 3 limousines. Then the limousine service was sort of slacking up. So I went and bought 2 trucks, and I went and got my own job hauling junk cars. And that's how I made it to be where I am here today.
My experience living in the Berkshires, especially going through the school system, it was really hard. I didn't particularly fit in with the Black Americans or the whites. I kind of found myself in an identity crisis, so I started hanging more around the white kids. I didn't know where I fit in or who I was, and it was really difficult. At some point, I was the only Black kid in my school. At that moment, I really wanted to be white so bad. I was being treated differently. The kids kind of didn't want to talk to me. I remember realizing then that I was Black, because living in Africa, I didn't realize I was Black, so that was really hard for me. And it wasn't until my sophomore year in high school that I finally found who I was. I started hanging around with people that understood me more, had the same ideas as me, and that's where I found activism and just learning more about myself.
Me and my brothers and sisters, we couldn't play. There were 6 or 7 of us. And my daddy taught us to work. And the only way you're gonna get it is you do it. You ain't gonna talk about it, and you ain't gonna sing about it. You're gonna get out there and do it. And that's why I came here and did my thing. I didn't bother nobody. I didn't ask nobody for nothing. I just went out there and worked and got it.
So my parents, when we first came here, it was all about opportunities. They were so persistent on go to school, get good grades, you work hard, you're gonna get it. But they're still kind of not aware of obstacles that we face as Black people in America. To them, their mindset is if you work hard, you're gonna get it. And it's way more complicated than that. And that's something they still struggle to understand. I remember having a conversation with my sister when the whole George Floyd thing happened. She said something that really was ignorant to me. She said, well, maybe if Black Americans weren't so aggressive with police, maybe they wouldn't get attacked. That really was something I didn't like that she said, because at the end of the day, if she got pulled over by the police, they're not gonna look at her as African, they're gonna look at her as a Black woman.
Black American and white American are 2 different people, any way you look at it. And you better have some good Black brothers and sisters to help you out to make it through this system.
It's a really big issue when we separate ourselves from Black Americans because it divides us. Immigrants that come here, our ancestors didn't go through the civil rights movement. So our understanding of everything that happened in here is a bit different than Black Americans who actually went through it. So I feel like a lot of conversations need to be had between those two communities about their own experiences and just mutually understanding each other, and just each group needs to educate themselves on both each other's histories. The Black Americans in the US is our fight too, and I feel like we need unity.
Human beings are remarkable. We are imaginative enough, innovative enough, powerful enough. We should be able to get this right. We could do this right. We could do this, right? But the only way to fix it would be unanimous agreement that something is broken. When you believe you are well, you don't seek medicine. The system is working exactly the way it was designed. Someone has to be lowly. Someone has to be poor and desperate so that someone else can sit high, so that someone else can be preferred. What would it look like if all lives really did matter, if everyone's health was precious? We could eat nothing but fresh vegetables and start every morning with a grateful meditation. We could walk 3 miles a day and it would all be for naught if no official research has ever been done on a brown body before. If access to proper care wasn't limited to proximity to wealth and whiteness, if a list of depressive symptoms included managing microaggressions and overuse of code switching or having no one to talk to who will grant you the benefit of the doubt, that would be a good start. What if we didn't have to spend so much time coddling white folks who don't see color into conversations about biases, tiptoeing around their feelings? If we could skip ahead to the part where we no longer have to convince anyone we are all flesh and bone and blood and organ and dream and family and future, and we are just as delicate, just as fragile as everyone else? What if we didn't have to intervene, interrupt, and advocate for ourselves while we are losing consciousness or bleeding out? What if providers saw their own reflections in the faces of every patient? Envision a facility where healing and care ain't hindered by injustice or ignorance, where humanity and dignity are valued more than supremacy. Imagine a health system like that, a community like that, a world like that.